What's up, guys? Ben Carey here of Capwise. Joining me, as always, Rob Vino of Rob Vino Sports and Wager Talk. Rob, how you doing?
I am good today, Ben. New week ahead of us. Um, Learn a few more things, right? As every week goes by, you learn a little bit more, put these pieces together. Um, some stuff preseason you were dead on right about, and some stuff preseason I find myself a couple of things I was not so right about. So, like I say, it's all about adjusting, being on the fly here for these football seasons that are only 17 weeks long. So you got to go with the flow.
Yep.
Otherwise, you get caught in the, you get caught under one of those waves and you never get out from under it. So,
I've learned the hard way in the past, and I think, sadly, that's the best way to learn.
mm.
But yeah, you got to stay afloat. So I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. Tell me about your best win in college football and then your worst play.
Well, my worst play had to be my top play Saturday, which was Notre Dame Purdue over the total. And I say it was my worst because it missed by a good margin. But in watching the game, I could very well have been Brian Kelly because I showed the same disgust with the offense that he did and the
Yeah.
points that they left on the field that day. Jack Cohn didn't have his best day. His receivers did not have their best day. For as many, huge plays that he missed throwing, his receivers dropped a fair amount as well. So that could have been reversed, but I will call that the worst play just because it was my top play and it missed by such a margin. Best play of Saturday. Boy, I hate to go FCS on you, so I won't do that.
Oh, well, I mean, that's fine. I
Um,
love my FCS.
but I will say this for those who watch, and if you bet FCS, if you don't, maybe you will now. Um, Incarnate Word out of the Southland Conference is an absolute moneymaker where totals are concerned. Played Texas State and actually won that game outright, Ben. They beat
Mhm.
Texas State on the field 46-42, but way over the total. It was a big play of mine out of, the extra board, FCS versus FBS.
Yeah.
And again, we saw a couple of upsets in that regard. I think we saw Northern Arizona beat Arizona too. So the FCS has certainly had a nice first 3 weeks as far as those head-to-head competitions go. But I would grade that as my best win just because it's something that I've been right about. Aside from that, I think my biggest win was probably the Utah State Air Force over. That game hit
Mhm.
94 points, and really the total was
Pretty
never. I think
easily.
that total was 54, 53 and a half, so
Yeah.
we went over by 40 points.
Well, another sneaky best win for you might be Arizona losing because
Mm.
that was one of your win totals
And
under.
that was one that we gave to them, right? We gave them
Yeah,
Northern Arizona. Like, okay, there's their win. They didn't even get
exactly.
that one.
And now you have that. I mean, if you were to do the numbers, then what was it, over 3.5,
No, it was less. It was only like over two and a
two and a
half, I
half?
think. Yeah.
But now they still haven't won a game, and now they're in the gauntlet of the Pac-12. So
Right.
you got to be feeling pretty good.
That's, it couldn't have worked out any better. I'll say that because, as I mentioned, I gave them a win with Northern Arizona and was
Yeah,
hoping that they couldn't pull a couple of upsets. But now they'd have to pull three to beat me. And that just
I know.
seems the shape that they're in right
Well,
now. It doesn't
well,
seem very
Colorado
good.
might be one now. I think they do
Mm.
play. Colorado's not looking good, but we have two teams that were in your worst play that we'll talk about, which I think is always important to do. Right? Is kind of reflect on those. But I think for me at least, looking at some of the worst losses, you can still learn a lot moving forward. So we'll be able to talk about those two teams too, because there could be potential value on them. And we'll hop on into the first one though, and that's Notre Dame, Wisconsin. Of course, Notre Dame winning, and I was actually surprised how they won against Purdue. They or excuse me, yeah, that was Purdue, right? Sorry, I was seeing
Mm-hmm.
that scroll on the bottom. This game though is in Soldier Field, and I think that's important, right? Neutral site. Um, Total I'm showing is, let's see here, opened at 46.5, and I'm showing a spread of 6.5 for Wisconsin. It's stayed about the same. Is that what you're seeing, Rob?
Yeah, some of the real early shops, Circa in Las Vegas,
Yeah.
places that get to the line real quickly, opened it around 3, and it
Okay.
got bet up immediately. Again, when we talk about shops that open up Sunday afternoon with college lines, generally speaking, it does not take a whole heck of a lot of money to move these numbers.
Hmm.
So I don't think it
Yeah.
took a lot to get it from 3 to 6, but it did start there, get there. Bigger handle places like Pinnacle, I think, opened maybe 5.5, Ben, and pushed up to six
Mhm.
and a half now. So there's been Wisconsin money, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, of course, that's interesting. With this game being in Chicago, what do you expect the fans to be? About 50-50, I would say, with both these teams, the way they travel?
Yeah, I don't know how the ticket allotment goes because I think it's a Wisconsin home game that's being played in Chicago. So I don't know if they how that works. If they decide to play the game in Chicago, do they give up some tickets to get the bigger stadium? Well, I don't
Hmm.
even know if that's bigger than Camp Randall, to tell you the truth.
It's probably not.
They
Yeah.
probably lose some tickets. But yes, Illinois, Chicago, that's a huge Notre Dame fan base, right? I mean, so we know Wisconsin travels tremendously, as good as any school in the country. Notre Dame's right there.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Notre
you
Dame has
see a
fans
lot of both.
everywhere, and they come out. They definitely come out in droves.
I would guess you're probably right, somewhere in that 50-50 range, unless, like I say, unless ticket allotment is
Yeah.
has to be some bigger proportion because of the home team.
So that total though, 46 and a half.
Mm.
What are your thoughts initially when you see that?
Well, I probably think it's about right. And in saying that, Ben, it's hard for me in this day and age to play anything under a total that's in the 40s because you can almost get to 27-20 by mistake nowadays
Hmm.
in college football. It's really, really
100%.
hard. So I wouldn't look to bet it under, but I think it's a good price if we just base it on what's going on so far this season.
Yeah, I won't shy away from playing totals that low if I really like them, but I lean under here. But for me, I'm probably going to stay away from this one just because I do think Notre Dame's offense can generate points and quickly if they need to. So if they're playing from behind in this one, I think this could be one of those games where they score late. Now, back to the site here in Chicago, I was just looking at some early forecasts. There could be some wind in this one. Of course, with Soldier Field in Chicago, you almost expect that at this point. But both these teams, specifically Wisconsin, I think they're fine with the wind. I mean, that's going to kind of play to their style, the way they control the ball and run the ball. For me, I lean with Wisconsin here. I know it's probably a pretty square play. Any thoughts on a side here?
Yeah, there's, the storyline here would be Notre Dame quarterback Jack Cohn, right? And which side of the fence do you stand on? Do you think that Jack Cohn, having been Wisconsin's quarterback last year and practicing every day against their ones, is that an advantage for him? He knows those guys, or is it an advantage for defensive coordinator Jim Leonard, who
Hmm.
knew his quarterback and might know how to defend him? He doesn't know Notre Dame's pieces as well, but he does know that quarterback. So that's always, that's one of those 2020 hindsight things, Ben. On Sunday morning or Saturday night,
Yeah,
everybody will have the correct answer to that.
exactly. Whatever happens, they'll say, "Well, they knew him well," or "Oh, Cohen knew the playbook."
Right.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
it's one of those type deals. Now, I will say this. Wisconsin's had a bye week. They're coming off a bye week. So they've had 2 weeks to get ready for this game. So
Yeah.
liking Wisconsin, um, as you said, I don't know that it's really all that square. I would think that Wisconsin might be the right side here. A couple of things just to note real quick where the game is concerned to break it down just a shade here. The concerns and probably the keys in this game going to be Notre Dame's offensive line, which has been abysmal so far this season, right? It just
Hmm.
has not been good. against the Wisconsin defensive front seven, which has been tremendous so far this season. For Notre Dame, just to throw some numbers at the listeners here, it was trouble like pulling teeth to run the football again last week against Purdue. You're really not supposed to have a hard time running against Purdue. If there's one thing the Boilermakers can do, it's pass rush off the edge, but it's really not a team that is stout in the middle, and Notre Dame couldn't move them. If you just take out their sack yardage last week, they go 20, or excuse me, if you take out Kyron Williams, 51-yard touchdown run, which came with 6 minutes left in the fourth, so you can legitimately say it was 102, I think, on the field that Purdue may have been worn down.
Wow.
If you take that 51 yards out, Notre Dame goes 29 carries for 91 yards. Just another bad rushing day for ND, who's, prior to that, bad rushing days against Florida State and Toledo. So it's not like they've played Wisconsin yet. I don't know if they can run the football here. That's going to be a question. And worse than that, Ben, might be their pass protection against those three squads. 15 sacks allowed in 3 games. Averaging 5 a game against Florida State, Toledo, and Purdue. Again, Purdue can rush the passer. I don't want to sell them short, but Wisconsin can get after you. So Notre Dame's offensive line going to be in trouble here. And how about real quick, Wisconsin's time of possession numbers so far this year? You talked about their style, and wind would help it. When they played Penn State to start, they lost that game, right? But they had a plus 24-minute, 48-second, almost 25 minutes worth of time advantage in that game. Bounce right back against Eastern Michigan, where they should dominate time of possession, plus 20 minutes and 8 seconds in that game. So, those are monster numbers. 20 minutes of possession edge in a game, and they're averaging 22 and a half right now. Total plays in those games, Wisconsin 95-51 against Penn State, plus 44 plays, and somehow lost the game, right? I think the 3-0 turnover margin did it.
That talk about a misleading score. Wisconsin wins that game 8 out of 10 times.
That's exactly the way they want to play, right? You don't touch the ball, we hammer you all game long. And then they came back and did it. Eastern Michigan only got off 38 snaps against Wisconsin, 75-38. So they've been dominant in that regard. Notre Dame, yes, they had some open shots last week throwing the football, but that was Purdue, and I don't know that those open shots are available against this defense. I think it's a tough road for Notre Dame here. Brian Kelly mentioned last week after the game that the youth on his team, they're very young, and they're still going through some growing pains. He thought they learned a little last week against Purdue, but this is a tough team to learn against, Ben. Wisconsin's a tough football team, and I would expect their offense to progressively get better. I don't know that it's ever going to be a dominant offense, but they weren't good opening week against Penn State as far as yardage is concerned. Were real good last week against Eastern Michigan. Now we'll see what they do against Notre Dame.
Yeah, the more I think about it, the public actually might be on Notre Dame here because it's Notre Dame, right? It's like the Gonzaga of college basketball, or the Cowboys. Right. Maybe, I guess that's still like a pretty good analogy. So the more I think about it, I'm curious if this gets to 7, but we'll have to see. I think if you like Wisconsin, I think 6.5 is probably a decent number.
Get there quick.
Yeah. The more I think, this reminds me of last week, 6.5 with Miami, Michigan State. Boy, I was on the wrong side of that one. So I fell for the bait there. But I just think Wisconsin has the better matchup. 6.5, it seems like they can cover that, but who knows? Notre Dame's gritty.
Yes,
I do like their quarterback, so we'll see about that one. Any final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think if you're going to play Wisconsin, you never like to trust their offense to have to win by a significant margin, right? In saying that, I'm somebody who laid 26.5 against Eastern Michigan just because I felt like Eastern Michigan had to pay for what Wisconsin failed to do against Penn State. But leaving a mismatch like that aside, you don't want to let this get to 7 when you have Wisconsin's offense involved. You want to keep it under a touchdown and see if Notre Dame can handle this. Again, the quarterback is a big storyline here. Does Jack Cohn know where to go with the football against this defense, or do they know how to get to him? I think Notre Dame's offensive line is going to have a lot to say about that, and if they play as porous as they have so far this season, Jack Cohn's not going to. I don't know that you can out-scheme the fundamental differences between defensive front and offensive line in this case.
Yeah. You make a really good point, especially with the total of 46, right around that. Every half point is worth more in that sense because there's going to be less scoring. So I think if you like Wisconsin, sure, there is a possibility. I guess I could see it going to 6 with maybe some reverse line move, something like that. But I think in this scenario, you take the 6.5. If it moves to 6, oh well. But if it moves to 7, you could definitely be sitting with a ticket at the end of the game with Wisconsin winning by 7. So yes. That's kind of how I look at that. So let's move on to the next game. This is Iowa State at Baylor. This was a Baylor team that I watched the full first game they played against. I think it was Texas State. We were on the points there. Good team. Iowa State, of course, they had the loss against Iowa, but I still think it's a pretty good team, and they're coming off a win against UNLV, which it's UNLV. But for Brock Purdy, I think it was big for him to just have some success, no matter who the opponent was, because that Iowa defense is no joke, and it can mess you up. Dustin Crum, he struggled for Kent State last week. So it's good to have a game where you show stuff, even though it's a lesser opponent. So I'm currently showing Rob the line here. It looks like -7 for Iowa State. They're going to be on the road again. And let's see here, just closed out of it. What do you see for a total? I think it was 47.
I'm showing about 47 and
yeah,
a half.
47
it's kind of
and a
scattered.
Half. Yeah.
And
so go ahead. Yeah, let's start it off.
Yeah, to that point real quick. And I was going to hit on this. I should have said this earlier about the Notre Dame game. Playing under 46 and a half, you have those key numbers of 45 and 44 all in your favor. A 24-20 game, which is a likely scenario in a Wisconsin-Notre Dame game, 27-17.
Absolutely.
Those numbers are all in your favor if you're playing under. Here, with 47 being a number that a final score will land on quite a bit, having the half, if you liked under, is in your favor. Playing underneath a key number. If you think it's going to get higher, get to 48, another one where 27-21, 28-20, 31-17, a lot of 48s happen. So if you like over, 47.5 is a perfect number to bet either way you like it, because you get an advantage either way. In this game, Ben, the biggest edge I see so far is in the scheduling. You talked about Iowa State having to play Iowa, certainly, an elite defense.
Yeah.
Out of the FCS, they had to play Northern Iowa. By FCS standards, an elite defense. They struggled with both of them. And then they got the break against UNLV. You talked about it. They blew them out. Purdy and Brees Hall and company had their way. For Baylor, they haven't had that stiff test yet. Texas State, Texas Southern, and Kansas, who they mowed down in their Big 12 opener last week, right?
3 cupcakes, more or less.
Yeah, and the difference, the power ratings I keep, the difference in opponents' power ratings so far after 3 games favors Iowa State by about 27 points. So it's a huge edge here in a game where, listen, they lost to Iowa, but nothing's been lost yet for Iowa State. I mean, the big prize is getting to the Big 12 championship game and winning the Big 12 title and hopefully finding yourself in that college football playoff or, in a New Year's Day 6 game, one or the other. But beating Oklahoma and winning that title would be huge for them. I like what I saw out of Baylor's offense last week. When Charlie Brewer transferred out, I was a little nervous about this team, but I think
we just heard the news. What happened with him?
Yeah, he's not going to play at Utah either.
It's crazy. I didn't see that coming.
No, not this early in the season. So maybe Baylor knew what they were doing. But the point here is that their new offensive coordinator, first-year offensive coordinator, Jeff Grimes, is the guy who coordinated BYU's offense last year for Zach Wilson.
Hmm.
And the reports that I was reading over this summer when you're trying to gauge what these guys are going to bring in, and knowing what he added to BYU last season as the offensive coordinator, I have some expectations for the Baylor offense. I'm not going to doubt the Baylor defense whatsoever because Dave Aranda, the head coach, is a defensive whiz. So we
Yeah.
know that end of the bargain is pretty much sealed. He'll get his talent in there. He's 2 years in. But the offense is important. And Jeff Grimes, this is something that sticks in my head, Ben. Before, I think last year it was the COVID season, they played Navy, I
Hmm.
think, in their opener. And it was a lot of money on Navy. And that was BYU wire to wire. I think they hung over 50 on Navy. And Navy's
Yeah,
head
they just
coach.
ran through those guys. I remember that game. It was one of the
Yeah,
first like bigger matchups, right? Like of the whole season. So
of the
a
whole
lot of people
season.
a lot of people were watching because we had the whole hiatus without sports. So I remember watching that one.
And Navy's head coach apologized after the game, right, for not having his team ready. But the point here is that prior to that game, I was reading an article, Salt Lake paper, where Jeff Grimes was telling anybody that would listen that his offense was going to be special. And, it's hard to hear that and believe it when you
Hmm.
know the head coach and his style of BYU. You think, oh, yeah, you're 3 yards in a cloud of dust, you're BYU. But Jeff Grimes was right. That offense was creative last year, and he's bringing that to Baylor. So let's see what they do here. What he brings scheme-wise, Iowa State hasn't seen on the field. Now, I'm sure they can go get tape of BYU last year and watch some tape. It's probably not the same as facing it on the field. Um, you played the game at that level, that it's probably not the same. It's
Yeah.
film is one thing, seeing a new scheme on the field is something it might take you a half to get used to. So Baylor would have that advantage here. But in the long run, Ben, I think the talent is on Iowa State's side. The advantage is there, and the scheduling edge to me. Once you've seen Iowa, Baylor's a good defense, but it's not Iowa. And I would
No.
expect in this Big Ten opener, Iowa State on the road under Campbell, not a bad proposition. So I'd probably look Iowa State. I was hoping for a little less. Like you said, this game is 7. My power ratings made it 6, but I could still see Iowa State.
Yeah, I have to lean Iowa State here. I go back to that Iowa defense and look, Brock Purdy, he forced, I think, 3 interceptions, right? And, interceptions are tough because for a quarterback, that's the worst thing you can do on the field because you flip the field, give possession to the other team. And then, like I said, UNLV, good to just get back on the field and have some success right after that game. I mean, we're talking regardless of opponent, like a 1 to a 10, because I mean, he couldn't have played any worse than Iowa, right? And I didn't watch much of the UNLV game, but of course, he had his way. And, last week, Iowa and Kent State, if it wasn't for, I think it was a 40-yard pass to their wide receiver, perfect ball. Kent State doesn't really put up any points. This Iowa defense is so good. So I do expect Iowa State to put up points in this one. I'm kind of curious about a team total over for Iowa State because I really do think they're a tad undervalued here. And I understand why Baylor is getting 7, right? Or laying the 7. But I just feel that Baylor is just not as talented. I don't. And I'm not a big Brock Purdy fan, to be completely honest. But I like the spot for Iowa State, even though it's on the road. It's in conference play. And like you said, the Iowa loss always stings. But at least they didn't have to go Iowa, Baylor, because that would hurt a little bit. But, now you kind of get the focus back, right? Iowa, the coaches will play it off. They say, hey, it's a non-conference game. Let's focus on winning the Big 12, eyes forward. So 7's tough though, right? I mean, I feel like that's a good number where it should be, I guess.
I think power ratings made it right about there, 6. So I think it's probably a good number. Odds makers probably anticipate a little Iowa State money here. And I think to your point about just getting on the field and having some success, you wonder. Iowa State's not a university that comes in with top 10 expectations ever, right?
No.
And so this year they play Iowa and they're ranked like number 9 in the nation, and they got this burden on their back. And maybe it was best for that burden to be lifted right away, because now they can play a little freer here conference season. I think, it's a situational, it's kind of a outside the box angle. But in a lot of instances with teams and their character, it works. And I think Iowa State, first of all, their head coach, pretty good motivator. And the team is loaded with veterans. So the character and the work ethic is there. So I agree with you. I think Iowa State, if you have to play it, as much as I'm interested in Baylor and how they do this season, I just don't think they're at that level yet.
Yeah, I'm curious if this goes back to 6.5, but I have a feeling it doesn't, because that's where it opened at. I would be surprised. So I guess if you like it, you should probably jump on it. But I don't like lane sevens unless I feel, super strong about the number. But I kind of was late on that one. So any thoughts on the total? I actually lean under a little bit in this one.
Yeah, it depends what you think you can get out of Baylor, because I'm with you.
Slight lean, I should say. It's if kind of gun to my head, I do say under.
Yeah, because you had talked about potentially liking a team total with Iowa State, and I think I would, probably ride with you on that. I could see Iowa State in a situation where they find their way to 30 points. Now the question is, can you get that additional amount out of Baylor? Can you get 31-17 to nudge over this total? And when you're trying to cut it that razor thin, you're best off just not being involved. If that's the way you're looking. Now, if you're looking at a much lower, if you think Baylor's only going to get to 10,
but then in that way, it's like, well, why don't you just bet Iowa State then, right? Yeah. So maybe I need to look at that, because it looks like the implied team totals would be around 27. So probably 27.5 for Iowa State. And then for Baylor, you're looking at 20 roughly. So, but I mean, that seems like a pretty reasonable score in this one. 27-20. Yeah. So this is a tight line in my eyes. Yeah. I may revisit this, because I haven't placed a bet on it, but it was one that I had kind of written down to see, let's discuss, see what Rob has to say. But yeah, this is a fair line, I would say.
And the only thing, you could actually see this getting out of hand if, in fact, this step up in class for Baylor is too much. Again, Texas Southern, Texas State, Kansas. You could take the all-stars from all three of those teams.
I was just going to say that,
State, right?
They would probably not. I mean, let's try to think. They would be as good as I don't know. And try to think of a team, how good they would be. Baylor.
Yeah. I mean,
maybe. I don't know.
It's not a real good. They're not tested. Let's put it that way. They haven't been tested, and they're going to be tested, because it's a conference game. You'll get Iowa State's full focus. They're not coming in here looking past anything. It's a conference opener, so we'll see.
Yeah, we will. So let's move on to our third and final game. Illinois at Purdue. Purdue's favored by 11 here. 53.5 is what I'm showing for a total. First of all, Illinois, I think we just got to get it out of the way. What a collapse in that one. I think that it was 17-10, right, with about, I think, 5 minutes left. And they ended up giving up a field goal and a touchdown. I mean, that was a pretty tough loss right there. And it was a complete 360 from what we saw in their first game with Nebraska. And now I think we're starting to see maybe what this Illinois team is. But hey, they're back at it. I think this team and Bielema will be ready to go just from his mentality and how he coaches. So I'm not too worried about that. But what I am worried about is the talent gap, right? Does Illinois have enough talent to hang here with Purdue on the road? So what are your thoughts with this one?
Well, first off, let's say this. As somebody who was on the Notre Dame Purdue game on Saturday, I watched that game, and when their star wide receiver David Bell hit the turf, it was a little scary for a while. He didn't move, but he's in concussion protocol now. One of the best, arguably the best, one of the three best wide receivers inside the Big Ten, and we know that the Big Ten has the two Ohio State kids, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, and David Bell's right there with them.
Yeah.
So maybe he doesn't play, and if he doesn't play, Ben, it gets a little worse for Purdue because his backup, Mershawn Rice, is out as well. So you lose, you're down to a third team at that position. Now, they're lucky they're fairly deep at wide receiver, but for a team that's so dependent upon throwing the football, to have their number one go down, and when a number one as good as he is, that's a significant hit. And to have his backup gone as well, or out as well, that's a significant hit too. I wish that they were playing a Big Ten team this week that was capable of throwing the football downfield. If they were, I would have no issue whatsoever playing. And I like Purdue, but I would have no issue playing against them. What I saw last week out of Notre Dame's wide receivers running free all over the field all game long and just not connecting. If Illinois with Brandon Peters and Brett Bielema's style to begin with, he's not really going to push it down the field. Although that's their biggest advantage here. I mean,
It is.
If they're going to have to protect because Karlaftis off the edge, they've got two bookend defensive ends that are going to be tough. They'll have to protect, and I don't know that their offensive line is good enough to hold up for an entire game. They're probably not. But I will say that, even though my power ratings show this exact number, Purdue minus 11.5, for some reason I find that to be a big number. I just think that's, to ask them to win. And this is a team, I was reading something interesting this morning. Purdue, since Jeff Brom got there, has been favored 15 times. And straight up, let's not even talk about the point spread, but straight up, they've only won 7 and lost 8. When they're favorites. So they don't even really win games, never mind cover games. So 11.5 off of Notre Dame, which is your rival. Maybe Illinois is angry. For what it's worth, Illinois lost a couple running backs in that game who will both play this week. But they had their moments running the football against Maryland. They really did. And I would think that, Bielema, in my estimation, is probably good enough on the sidelines to keep this thing within 11.5 points, especially if Bell doesn't go. I could see Bell creating havoc if he's in the game. But as we speak right now, Ben, if you read between the lines of what we're seeing here early in the week, it doesn't look like he'll go. I don't think they'll take any chances with an NFL first or second round.
I was just going to say that with this number, it's leaning towards him not playing. Because I think if he's in, you'd probably see this move or see something closer to a 12, maybe, just because he makes that much difference in this offense. Sometimes I see this a lot, Rob, and I'm sure you do too. It's almost like they put the number kind of in the middle, right? Where it's to say if he's going to play or not play, but they can also just let the line move if they feel strongly. But I just feel like at an 11, it kind of shades a little over to him not playing, I would assume. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Well, it probably would be. And again, I don't know how much odds makers account for wide receivers.
It's true.
In the line, often we can find a lot of value as bettors in other position groups that aren't quarterback.
Even offensive line at times too.
Right.
We saw with the Colts.
If there's cluster injuries across the front, you're right. It's just not accounted for in the point spread very much. Not the way it is for a quarterback. So
no.
My biggest thing here is, and I think I would lean Illinois in this game just because I think the points are heavy here. Boy, I wish I could depend on Brett Bielema to take advantage of his biggest advantage in the game. But he's a stubborn, prehistoric offensive style coach, right? He wants to run the football. Notre Dame couldn't run it last week against Purdue. So what would make me believe that Illinois can run it against Purdue? But again, they're so pass dependent on offense, and Illinois, they didn't do a terrific job
Hmm.
against Maryland because I think in the end they gave up about 480 yards. But Maryland is a more explosive offense than Purdue. Maryland's a scary offense,
Yeah.
and somehow, some way, with a little luck, I will say Illinois had a couple of situations go their way until the end when they lost. Um, I could make these arguments back and forth, which leads me to believe when I'm kind of in that mindset, let's take 11 and a half points. Not that I'm going to do it, but if I was, again, like you said before, gun to head, I think you play Illinois plus 11 and a half here. I think you can count on them to be able to do enough damage run-wise, and without David Bell, Purdue will have to find another way to consistently move the football.
Hmm.
Milton Wright's a good receiver. They can do some things, but consistently, not so sure.
I have to lean with Illinois here,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know if I'm going to bet this myself. I was looking at the first half lines. I only looked at two spots, and it's at 6.5. I doubt I'm going to find a 7 unless we see the line full game move up. Just kind of doing math in my head, I would be surprised if any 7s pop up when it's still at a full game at 11. But first half might be interesting. We'll see. 6.5. But yeah, I lean Illinois here. I think I don't want to call it a bounce back spot necessarily. If they could just eliminate how they played in the last 5 minutes, they might cover this one. So it's not technically a bounce back, but it's more like can we recover from what happened in that fourth quarter? And the way he coaches, I do have some confidence that those players at least are going to be ready to go. But it just kind of comes down to can they stop Purdue on offense when they need to?
And we've talked a lot about strength of opponent schedule so far during this show, Ben, but let's put it
Mm-hmm.
to use here in this game. Knowing what we know now, Illinois played Nebraska, who really defensively shut down Oklahoma last week, right?
They've only gone
Nebraska,
up since the first game. We'll put it that way.
yeah,
Yeah.
especially defensively. Offensively, but defensively, they looked really good. They played Texas San Antonio, who is legitimately one of the top three
Yeah.
contenders for CUSA. They played Virginia, who we've seen nothing but explosive offense. Now they get buried by North Carolina. They give up 59, but they get to
Mhm.
40 just about. They get to
Yeah, they were
39 against
scoring.
UNC. And then they play Maryland, another explosive offense. So of those teams, Purdue doesn't necessarily blow you away in comparison to Nebraska,
Hmm.
Virginia, Maryland. So I think 11 and a half might be steep here for them. And like you say, there's a little bit of trust. Even you could say negative things about Brett Bielema and his style, but there's a little bit of trust that he'll get his team involved in a close game,
Yeah.
whether he wins it or loses it. But you feel like, I can count on this guy to be in one of those close type games in the fourth quarter, and 11 and a half just seems like a lot.
Doesn't 53.5 seem a little high, or is that just me?
Without David Bell, it would.
Yeah.
To me, like I say, there's issues on both sides for the offense. Can Illinois protect their quarterback? Can Purdue find a way to move the football without Bell? Bell attracts so much attention. One of those guys that's going to draw the double
Hmm.
right away. And now defenses don't have to worry about that if he's not in the game. Now you can play more straight up
Exactly.
against that Purdue team. And they're not a team that can run the football. So it's a real tough loss for Purdue.
Yeah, and someone here said that if they think Illinois might cover if Bell doesn't play, and they were saying that with Minnesota up next week, that does make sense, right? But at the same time, I think from Purdue side, this this is a close enough type of game, and maybe the coaches know of the spreads and not, but they still prepare for the most part very much the same, unless it's like a FCS opponent or someone who is just terrible this year, but they're still going to be ready to go. Maybe they put in some plays for the scout team, but I don't see that with this one just because it's a conference game. They're going to have to be ready to go, but they do want to make sure that Bell is ready to go. And with a concussion, it's tough, right? I would say maybe like a 25-30% chance he plays. I'm just kind of putting out a number there. I just don't see it happening, really.
Yeah, and I think, well, two things here. Not only is it a conference game, Ben, I would dispose of the look-ahead theory to Minnesota,
Mhm.
only because Illinois is a division team as well. They're both from the West. So this is a
Yeah,
huge game for Purdue. You got to beat a team like this, right? And
you
for
have to.
Illinois as well. Illinois is not going to get, they're not going to beat Wisconsin. They're not going to beat Iowa. They're not going to beat those teams in their division.
You got to beat. You got to beat the ones like this that are.
And they've got a 1-0 head start in that division by beating Nebraska. Where David Bell is concerned, my thought is that his status, his NFL draft status, leads me to believe that the kid will have a lot of say. So obviously, team doctors are first and foremost. But even if he's semi-cleared, the kid and his parents will have a lot to say about whether or not they don't take an extra week off just to be safe. You know what I mean? I don't think he'll go here. I really don't.
Yeah, and
That could change end of week, but who knows?
I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, even if they clear him, he could say no, and they would just
Yeah.
report it as he's not ready to go. So we would
Yeah.
never know one way or another. So you have that working against it too. So I'm just thinking with this number currently, right? I try to think a few steps ahead, but I don't know if it moves or not. I don't know. It's hard. It's really hard to say if it's already completely booked into the number, which I do agree with you. I don't think he's warranted like a point or two, but we see it time and time again with market overreactions where people will just say, oh, Bell's out. We're going to slam the other side. Right. So it's hard to say.
It's funny because people like you and I that follow college football, the entire FBS on a weekly basis will know the name David Bell. The casual bettor won't really even know who David Bell is. I mean, that guy will get drafted to
Guess
somebody's
that's true.
favorite team, and they still won't know. They'll be like, "Who's this Bell guy from Purdue that the Falcons just
Yeah.
drafted?" If you're a Falcon fan, I don't think he's not somebody
He's not.
nationally known.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
good point. It's not
like
a.
Chris
It's not a.
Olave,
Yeah, it's not. If Olave was out, yeah, and he's not a
right?
quarterback, so he's not like the star. That's a really good point. I think sometimes we or even me in this situation, we just get too in the weeds with stuff. Maybe we overthink it a tad. So, all right, we have a question here before
Sure.
we let you go. This is a good one, I think, to discuss with you. Nebraska, Michigan State. Let's see. I think it's at 4.5, which I think immediately people are like, "That's it." uh, but Nebraska, we have to give them credit. Their defense has improved. Offensively, they're just I don't know what's going on there. They just seem like they're confused on offense. Is just the best way to put it. It just seems like they've stuck with Martinez, and it's just not working. I don't know what else to say at this point. -5 in some spots for Michigan State. I'm not surprised that line's going up, and then 52.5. Do you have any thoughts on this one in Lansing?
Yeah, I think at this point in
East
time,
Lansing.
um, maybe they're both gaining some confidence, Ben, but I think that Michigan State's confidence right now is worth more. You have to like the way Peyton Thorne is throwing the football. And the fact that he has that built in rapport with Jaden Reed, a kid he played high school ball with. And they tore up Miami last week. And Michigan State, Miami had their share of bad moments. A lot of
Mhm.
yardage, dropped touchdowns in the end zone, but that's
Fumble
typical
to start the
Miami.
game in
Right.
almost in the red zone. Yeah.
Um, but Kenneth Walker, the Wake Forest transfer at running back, and the passing game now with Thorne, I just think that they're probably a little more well-rounded at this point in time. I would also, and these things are not blanket statements. You can't apply these to every game, but I do think that Nebraska sold out 100% in that game against Oklahoma last
I
week.
agree with you.
And
I
I
think that
don't
was
know.
the best game they played all year, to be honest.
Yeah, and you wonder if they can match that type of intensity and focus again, back-to-back weeks. I'm not sure they can. Um, So I think Michigan State's probably in a better situational spot this week. I think they're more capable of moving the ball through the air. I saw you just flashed up a comment that I couldn't agree more with, and we talked about this last week. Is the
Martinez.
inconsistencies throwing the football out of Adrian Martinez? He just doesn't
Yeah,
complete.
at this point, I don't understand why he's still out there. I mean, unless this backup or backups are just not ready to go because it's just a sinking ship. I mean, he can make plays with his feet, which he did against Fordham and Buffalo, but he just misses so many throws. I mean, there's a rollout wide open tight end. He overthrows him by 5 feet. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
at this point, it's just he's giving away possessions and plays. And Michigan State, they're going to be at home. They're pumped up. I mean, this place is going to be sold out. Of course, there's going to be red there because Nebraska travels regardless, but I think Michigan State's going to be fired up for this one. And Mel Tucker doesn't like Nebraska. He's going to be ready to go.
Right.
Ex-Colorado guy, of course. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if this gets up to 6, to be honest. And you know what's funny is more times than not, Nebraska is just such an easy public play. But I think over the years, the last few years, it's changed a little bit where the public kind of wants to fade Nebraska. And I personally think this line gets to 6, Rob. I do.
And if that's the case, and folks out there like Michigan State, go now.
Yeah.
I just happen to think they're in a good situational spot this week to beat this team by a touchdown. And again, that game that they played last week, and you know something else, Ben, that kind of got me last week is when Scott Frost was at Central Florida, and they had that very fast up tempo offense, and they were very creative, and they were well rounded. They could run or pass. Now it seems like you listen to some of the things he was saying last week, how he wanted to play bully ball, smash mouth ball with Oklahoma. We want to bloody their nose. We want to do this. We want to do that. And it's almost like he's in one of these tough guy competitions now. And Nebraska's done nothing but play unders all season long, partially because the defense has been pretty good. Now, last week that umbrella shell type defense to prevent Oklahoma from going over the top, it worked against them.
Yeah.
I don't know that works here against Michigan State because they will take what's given to them.
Mm-hmm.
Those kids are big on the outside for Michigan State, the two wide receivers. So again, fundamentally, I like Michigan State. Situationally, I like Michigan State, so I could definitely see why this game's gone up, and if it does go up even further, it wouldn't surprise me either.
So -5 at home, opened at 4.5. Are we saying that Michigan State's only a point better, or maybe I guess you could go up to 1.5, 2 better than Nebraska on a neutral?
I think that's where odds makers would rate it right now because that's kind of what raw power ratings say. But going beyond the raw power ratings and handicapping the spot we're in this week, obviously the line doesn't account for the spot situationally, and we're talking about a lot of things that are extenuating the confidence of Michigan State. But I think Mel Tucker's got that group believing. Remember, they're both off horrible seasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they both needed to prove something this year. But the eye test tells me that Michigan State's a little further along at this point in time and a little more confident at this point in time.
I mean, you could make an argument that before the season started, for both these teams, the spread would probably be a pick 'em.
Right.
I mean, more or less, right? And I think Michigan State just has shown that they have it put together. I mean, they returned, I think it was 19 starters from last year. Nebraska returned a lot too, but we've touched on this. It's like, well, who cares if you return your starters? At the end of the day, I mean, everyone returned a lot of starters for the most part, and it just seems like Nebraska on the road. You make a really good point about Oklahoma. That's kind of sticking in my head. Did they show out for that? And I know it wasn't a conference game, but I know how Scott Frost thinks. He used to play in that rivalry. I know he got the guys super hyped up. He wanted to shock the world. And they hung in there. I mean, they covered the spread pretty easily. They kept it a low-scoring game. But now can he get Nebraska and his players thinking the same way on the road again? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. I have to
that's
lean Michigan State here.
that's what you come down to. You come down to the analysis wise. Can Nebraska do what they did last week on a consistent basis? And knowing the nature of that squad during his tenure, there's no reason for you or I to believe that they can duplicate it. If they do, then I probably have to rip up a ticket on Saturday. But
You
I
tip
just
your
don't.
hat and you say, "Hey."
That's all, right?
I had to tip my hat to Michigan State on Saturday. I said, "Hey, I looked up the numbers and I said, I know people are still a little high on Miami, and I said, you know what, I'm willing to take a risk at 6.5, and I was wrong, and I tipped my hat. So
Boy, and is there a kid in college football? I mean, honestly, De'Ara King at Houston was fabulous, and De'Ara King at Miami isn't the same De'Ara King
yeah,
from Houston. So that team, I'm done with that team. By the way, they're
no,
just
I can't touch them because they may go out and cover their next. Yeah, I think they don't even play this week, right? They're off, or do they play?
they might play somebody lesser if they
See,
do
that's how
play.
much I even paid attention to them this week. It's like I don't want anything to do with that team.
Yeah, they just
Looks like
wow.
they play. Oh no, they're off because yeah, they're on a bye here. It looks like so. Anyways, yeah, just King, just night and day, man. It's kind of crazy to see. So one other thing to watch for: a little bit of wind. It doesn't look like anything crazy. I mean, I use a few different resources. It's hard to kind of predict that a few days out, but
Hmm.
anytime you're in Big Ten country, kind of have to watch for that, right? Iowa, Ohio State will have some windy games, Wisconsin. So always keep an eye out for that. Purdue, of course, Minnesota. I think my favorite play here has to be the under, Rob. You mentioned the shell defense, which is for Michigan State, they're going to say, fine, if you guys want to play deep, whatever, we're going to run the ball, and then you're going to have to come up and we're going to try to take shots. But I think with Mel Tucker playing this team a few times, I think he's going to just try to run the ball up their throats. I don't think he's going to try to get cute at home. And I just don't have any confidence in Nebraska's offense. So I have to lean under here. This is probably going to be a play. Actually, I already bet this play. So I got it at 52.5. I'm locked in there.
Yeah, and I don't think Nebraska's played an overall season long yet. And it's that combination that you just mentioned. It's the offense can be stagnant for long stretches, and the defense has been better than expected. That's the anchor of this team right now is the defense. As scared, and I speak from my own standpoint, as scared as I get of Adrian Martinez, um, when I'm on him, I always get reminded that he's just as capable of missing a play as he is of making a play, and
He'll
and
he'll
it
make
comes
it.
back
He'll
to
have an
haunt him.
80-yard run and he'll make a crazy play, and then the next series he'll overthrow a guy 10 yards. Great point.
So I think the way Peyton Thorne, is throwing the football right now, far more consistent. Um,
Okay, here's a comment for you.
hey Rob, quick side note: I hope you're loving this Arizona under bet as much. Yeah, I am.
He was
It,
the one who
too
asked you
fantastic.
if you remember, like what are your thoughts on this play? And you're like, well, I
Just
have
happen to
a
have
few
that one.
thoughts.
Yeah, no, we're in good shape. DGN Jazz, DGN
Yeah,
Jazz. Yep.
he's a good guy in our Discord. He goes by Jazz, but yeah, he was all over that one. He was like, I like the under. Yeah, you got to be feeling pretty good now at this point. I mean, let's look at the schedule here. I know they have Colorado. But you know what? Part of me feels a little bad for Jeb because you lose in Northern Arizona. That's tough for your first win, and you lose that one. That loss that hurts.
And it's
Yeah,
hard. It may not be that bad down the road, but
in
the
the moment.
overhaul, the
Yeah,
overhaul. This week, when you look at their depth chart for this week at quarterback, there's three guys, or. We don't really know who's going to start. One of these three are going to start. They've tried two already. Um, but again, you're talking about three guys that their entire lives have played nothing but spread offense, shotgun snap. and now you're going to ask them to go pro style and move up under center, and it just takes time. And it's a football thing that if you haven't been on the field or if you don't follow X's and O's, maybe you don't know how big of a deal it is. It's a big deal, and he runs a complicated system for kids.
It would be like changing your shooting form in basketball, and just a coach coming in and say, "Hey, instead of your elbow here, you're going to start shooting like this," and then you're kind of like, "This is how we're doing it." there's really no, but it's kind of like, yeah, you can go transfer, I guess.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, how would you like to be Gunnar Cruz? You're a kid who transferred in from Washington State.
Oh man.
I mean, that's, go back and play for Nick Rolovich.
Hey, if you want to play a fun game, Rob, or anyone listening, go look at a few transfers just across the board. There's a lot of guys who are not playing at teams. And I was a proponent of the transfer portal, but at the same time, I hope these kids hear these stories of these guys, because I think it was Scott Van Pelt said, he's like, the grass isn't always greener. It's just, there's just more grass or something. And, KD Nixon's a guy from Colorado. He was looking to enter the draft. I don't know if he would have been drafted or not. He would have been a late rounder. And I think guys were like, hey, you need to go back a year and play. He transfers to USC. He's like the 7th wide receiver on their depth chart.
And KD Nixon has been around the block because he started at Buffalo, if I remember right. He didn't even start at Colorado. He went from point A to point B and now to point C. And I think for him, I mean, at Colorado, he was in a good trio of wide receivers, so he wasn't your first option. When you have Laviska Shenault, you're not the first option. But statistically, it's gotten progressively worse for him. I feel like he was better at Buffalo.
Yeah, and I think it was good recognition to play for Colorado, but I don't really understand that move if he thought he needed more film, right? Or just because, I mean, this is a weird situation for him, and that's just one guy. And, of course, there's probably more guys that it pans out positively than it does negatively, but something that these guys are going to have to start considering, because you may move to a spot and then you're not even seeing playing time, and or multiple guys transfer in and maybe they're open with it, saying like, hey, I think you're going to be here, but we're not guaranteeing you anything, right? Like, whoever looks best in camp, I always put it this way: the guys will have a leg up to start. Maybe KD Nixon they're like, hey, you're going to work in with the twos to start, right? Starts dropping balls, learning the offense, and then all of a sudden you have I know USC has a few wide receivers, and all of a sudden those guys start playing better than you will. As a head coach, you're going to play who's best. So
yeah, that is a tough place to go, right? Because USC still does recruit 4 or 5 stars. You're KD Nixon. You've got experience on your side, age on your side, but you don't have that rating on your side, and you haven't, been as spectacular enough in college football to just, as you say, land a spot in an air raid offense as one of the 4 wides. But maybe he thought he could. But again, he kind of, maybe he saw some writing on the wall with Colorado this year and just thought he'd go to a more explosive club. But I'll say this too: Middle Tennessee, Ben, to your point, their quarterback, Bailey Hockman, transferred out of NC State to quarterback here, got pulled in the second quarter Saturday, and is no longer on the team, left the team. Now, he says it's because he's got a newborn on the way. But this is how finicky the transfer portal is. If you don't like the fact that you get pulled, you just either leave and go somewhere else or you quit, one or the other.
Yeah.
His reasons could be deeper than that. But there's plenty of cases where kids don't like something that happened at practice, and they enter the transfer portal the next day. It's crazy.
I mean, Brewer, right, at Utah. Did you read into that at all? I didn't see any details yet. It's weird.
And in watching the game the other night against San Diego State, because I thought Utah would bounce back, right? They didn't bounce back whatsoever. He just played poorly. And I thought, his issue at Baylor was he was a sitting duck because they didn't have offensive line play. And you know what? At Utah, he's a sitting duck San Diego State was all over him, and the week before BYU was all over him. So
Yeah, and now
I
they're getting 14 points at home, which is interesting. But you know what? I kind of like the. I was looking at. I'm spacing his name. Their backup's not terrible.
yeah, they're going with some mobility. That's
Yeah,
what it is. I think maybe Whittingham sees the writing on the wall. My offensive line isn't as good as I thought, and it's rare for him where line
that's
play
his
is
style.
concerned,
Like,
right?
yeah, they recruit very well. Defensive linemen, offensive linemen. That's kind of their mo. So, before we let you go, Rob, is there any other off the board, like very low key game, maybe out of the MAC or anything that you've been eyeing that we could just discuss, or maybe you have a lean on?
I think, real quick, something to watch here, Ben, is this Indiana Western Kentucky game coming up this week. Right now,
I like the Hilltoppers, man. They're a fun little team to watch.
Yeah. And again, for those who don't know, they got a transfer quarterback from Houston Baptist, Bailey Zappi. The offensive coordinator for Houston Baptist went to WKU. The top two receivers for Zappi and his OC last year went to WKU.
Do you think they all just came, like they had a meeting and they're like, "Hey, let's find a school to go to, and then we'll follow the O coordinator," and then
I
boom.
tell you,
That's basically what happened, I think.
and that offense was as they couldn't play any defense, but they were as yardage productive, point productive as any team in FCS last year. You could just bank on them playing overs. And when I saw those moves this spring, you put the asterisk next to Western Kentucky, and guess what? They went out against Army, a team that will only give you 8-9 possessions a game, and they scored 45 points.
I think they scored on every possession but 2.
Which is
like most times you hear that and you're like, you guys won the game, right? But of course, Army, it's totally different. So are you thinking Western Kentucky, or are you going with the over? What's your best?
Well, I'm wondering. Now Michael Penix is going to play.
Yeah.
So in my estimation, Michael Penix plays this game, probably gets over, because Penix does play, and Indiana will find some holes in the Western Kentucky defense. But you have to wonder. We talked about Iowa State and how they're not accustomed to coming in with such expectations. Remember, Indiana was a huge media off-season publication darling.
Oh, yeah.
This year. Indiana. And they've basically nosedived 3 weeks into the year, right?
Yeah.
And after that Cincinnati game last week, which they really had in hand for a long time, do they go to Bowling Green, Kentucky, and get excited about that game? If they don't, they're going to be down 21-0 before they can blink. I know Tom Allen did a good job in the bowl game against Ole Miss, which is a comparable offense, a better offense, but same style. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that the situation is the same. Indiana was gung-ho to play that bowl game against an SEC team. Now you're in Bowling Green, Kentucky against Western Kentucky. I think the home team and over are both live plays there. That team can make 62.5 look really small, and that's what the total is.
Yeah, someone said Penix hit his ceiling. I kind of agree. Like, he has not looked great this year. What was the injury again? I'm forgetting.
It was a knee.
That's interesting that I know he's not as mobile as we'd like him to be, I think, at times, or what his perception might be. But if he's banged up a little bit, he may not have any opportunity to kind of break out of the pocket there. It seems like 9's a good number. Did this open at 10? Or did it not reach 10?
I don't think it ever reached 10.
Yeah, because I think if it got to 10, it probably was not there for a while.
Yeah, I think there might be Western Kentucky money come later this week.
Yeah.
Again,
I bet this closes closer to an 8. I do. They're going to be at home, and I think people will start to see. They're like, all right, Western Kentucky can put up points, and I think Indiana hasn't won a game yet, right? Or did they have a?
They had one in between that they
won,
that's
right.
The middle game. I'm spacing on who it was, but they
see. It was Idaho. So
there you go.
Yeah, but at the same time, right? Indiana has played Iowa and Cincinnati, and they were hanging for a little bit against Cincinnati, but I just think that Western Kentucky, this is one of those games where it's circled type thing. Like, they want to prove, hey, we're not just a small team out of the MAC, right? Like, we can put up some points and potentially win this game. They kept it close with the Army, kind of came back late in that game. I like Western Kentucky here. You know what? I don't know if I want to say a sprinkle of the money line just yet. I have to look a little more into it. I think it's a good spot.
Yeah, you have to be ready, Ben, to play a team like that because they're to the line so quickly. I know, in watching Ole Miss a couple of weeks, I remember Kirk Herbstreit was doing the analysis. He said, "I'm sorry we can't show you replays of the previous play, but Ole Miss
It's
goes
so
so
quick.
fast."
Yeah.
And Western Kentucky goes, that Houston Baptist offense, the style that they brought, is just as fast. And if you're Indiana and you come in there lackadaisical, they will hang 21 on you before you can blink. And then Indiana can chase them down. Don't get me wrong; they're good
Mhm.
enough. They're a Big Ten school; they can chase them down. That's where the total
And that
comes into
defense,
play.
yeah, that Western Kentucky defense we saw
Right.
not the best. But next week, Indiana has Penn State on the road.
What a
So it's
revenge
a
game
little
for
bit of a
Penn
sandwich
State.
spot, right? Like, you come off a Cincinnati game, a lot of emotions in that one. It was close throughout. Now you're on the road here against Western Kentucky.
It
This
sets up.
this is more of a look ahead spot, I would say, than what we were saying with the previous game.
Right, the Purdue situation, right?
Yeah.
No, this is, and for Penn State, I mean, that is a revenge and a half spot because that 36-35 loss that they took last year to open the season that led to their 0-5 start, the loss in Bloomington, just living in this area, that's not forgotten.
Last one, LSU minus 2.5. Do you have
They
any
have
thoughts?
Mississippi State, is that right? They have Mississippi
Yeah,
State?
I haven't looked into this one yet, so I'm not going to try to.
Let me just say this real quick. This game last year was played the very first game of the year. And LSU had, I don't get on the soapbox too often, but Bo Pelini is a guy that he was a DC last year.
He's getting-
Ogeron brought him in. And it was the
Getting killed.
very first game Mike Leach played an air raid system with Mississippi State talent, right? It was a square peg in a round hole, and they threw for almost 600 yards against Bo Pelini. I think it was 598 or something, and they beat him. So LSU, I think, from that standpoint, they'll have a chip on their shoulder, a revenge motive for this game. So I think you'll get a real good effort out of them. They played good last week. And MSU, boy, they should have beat Memphis. I mean, if you rescore that game statistically, it's not close. It's not close. Memphis had a couple of big plays and a return. Otherwise, Mississippi State really won that game. So it's an interesting game, but I would lean towards LSU here. I think there's going to be a little extra focus on this game.
I think they're coming around a little bit, right?
Yeah.
They're starting to figure it out. I mean, I think people still think of LSU from that UCLA game, but it's hard to say, right? McNeese State, Central Michigan, yeah, they took care of business there. I have to lean with LSU too. I think talent wise, they're the better team. I know it's Starksville, I believe. It's going to be a crazy environment. Of course, it's SEC football, but
a lot of cowbell, a lot of
cowbells. Yeah, they need to. I forget what team it was. They practiced. Let me see here. They played Mississippi State, and the quarterbacks were taking their notes and stuff and film, and the coaches have the cowbells, and they were. I think it was NC State, and NC State lost. So
they did. It's a tough environment.
It is.
It's tough to get to. You fly somewhere that's a 3-hour bus ride away.
Like,
everything.
Where am I? Where the hell is Starksville?
Right.
So cool. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up. As always, we really appreciate you being on. My following is always like, when's Rob coming back on? So I'm like,
I appreciate it.
Every Tuesday. And then everyone can find your work, you said, on Wager Talk and then on your website, correct?
Yeah, wagertalk.com. All the media content we provide. I'll be doing various college football, NFL shows this week, beginning with tonight. So if you're not a member yet, real quick, Ben, for your audience, if you're not a member yet, it doesn't cost you anything, guys. You just go there, insert your email address, and you'll have access to all the content, media content that they provide and written content. If you're interested in selection packages, my homepage is right there at wagertalk.com. Twitter is real easy. It's at Rob Vino Sports.
What's the schedule look like for the rest of the week? You have something today, then you have the green room, right? Next tomorrow?
Yes, I'll be today. I'm on a Wager Talk panel about 45 minutes from now, where we're going to discuss 3 games. There's several panels discussing almost every game on the board. Tomorrow, I'll be with Drew Martin. I don't know if you know Drew or not, but Drew
Yeah, I've
hosts a
seen his
show.
name. He does pretty good work from what I've heard.
He was a host at Sports Memo when I
Mhm.
was there, but Sports Memo long ago. I'm one of the originals from there. We ran a thing called Every Game on the Board College, and we do
That's
that
right.
on Wednesdays. Every single game on the board. I'm responsible for 14 of those tomorrow. You can find me doing that.
You
It'll
get
be live.
Yukon, Wyoming.
I've got
They
361. I'll tell you real
they
quick.
should just give you that one, right? You're the Husky around here.
You know what? The first game I have out of the shoot is Colorado, Arizona State. I have 361 down
Ooh.
to 388. And you know what? 381, 382 is Wyoming, Connecticut. I'll have that
Oh,
game.
I'm tuning in.
I'll have that game.
There's
Yeah.
a guy in our Discord who he said he's gonna fade Yukon every game, and he's 4-0 now.
Unbelievable.
So he's like I don't care what the number is. He's like I'm gonna bet it. So
This
kind of
number's
funny.
probably short, 29 and a half. I mean, Wyoming's a good
Wyoming on
football
the
team.
road though scares me a little bit, but Yukon right now. I think there's something came out that the Yukon head coaches they're gone after 6 months. Was that credible? A source? Did you see that?
Well, the
Like
head
their
coach is gone.
Yeah, the head coach is gone, but their
Yes,
other coaches, their contracts are expiring after 6 months, and it's already written out. I didn't confirm it, so maybe if you don't know, I need to check my sources. But I
Yeah,
mean,
no,
it wouldn't surprise you though, right?
no, I mean they've driven.
Oh
that
yeah, here it
program
is,
into the
6
ground.
months severance.
There you go.
So, man, if you
It's a
need
bad
any help with
situation.
that Arizona game, Arizona State, Colorado, there could be a chance that Brendan Lewis isn't the full starter for the game. I've been hearing some reports from some guys who've been at practices, so
Mm.
that backup is a freshman. So I don't know what to expect there.
Yeah, offensively, it hasn't been good 2 weeks in a row now.
No, it's been really bad. So I guess UConn did cover last week. Is that right? I didn't think they covered a game.
Yeah,
yet.
they played Army, right? Yes.
They did cover.
They gave up a ton of points, but they scored at the end and
Oh
wound up
wow.
covering.
Well, you know what? Congrats.
There you go. Purple.
There you go. Yeah, that's funny. All right, Rob, we'll let you go. I know you have the other show coming up and you'll prep for that, so I appreciate it once again.
All right, buddy. Thanks for having me.
Yep. See ya.